which are Hello and welcome to the fourth lecture of this course, Introduction to Cultural Studies. Now we just finished looking at Edward Said's Orientalism and looking at the way how that book is a magnificent document, a magnificent study of the politics of production of the other identity, and how is the other profoundly ideological, profoundly political, profoundly epistemic. So the idea of producing the other is the idea of producing consolidating the hegemonic identity of the colonizer. In the case of colonialism, is a colonizer. In the case of patriarchy, is a male. In the case of caste system, a superior caste, etc. So the other must be produced incessantly, endlessly, in order to consolidate, in order to prove, legitimize, sanction the authority, the agency, the supremacy of the hegemonic, hegemonic individual, hegemonic race, hegemonic condition. Now, what we do in this particular lecture is we look at a more complicated essay. So what Said does very brilliantly, and the reason why we look at Orientalism as a foundational text, is he is probably the first philosopher, the first historian who comes up with this idea of looking at the gaze of the European, the Eurocentric gaze, which sort of reifies, which measures, which contains, which exoticizes, which essentializes the other, the non-European. Now, when you come to someone like Homi Bhabha, which the person whom the essay which we'll study today is an essay by Homi Bhabha called The Other Question. When you come to someone like Homi Bhabha, we find that he takes a more complicated and more problematic stance when it comes to the idea of the other. He looks at the other not just as an inferior person, as someone who is sort of strategically considered to be inferior, strategically produced as an inferior person, know that, but someone or something or a certain section, a certain category, which is incessantly produced over and over again through certain stereotypes, through certain ambivalences. And the key word over here is ambivalence. So we will start the essay by looking at how Power talks about ambivalence. So what is the ambivalence in the politics of production of the other, the politics of the identity production of the other? Okay, so this is Homi Bhabha's The Other Question. So at the very beginning of the essay, we find, I've sort of highlighted the sections which we'll study in details. The yellow highlights are the ones which are important for us for the purpose of this particular lecture. And he says quite clearly, an important feature of colonial discourse is its dependence on the concept of fixity and the ideological construction of otherness. Fixity as a sign of cultural, historical, racial difference is a discourse of colonialism. Is a paradoxical mode of representation. It connotes rigidity and unchanging order as well as disorder, degeneracy, and demonic reputation. So, I mean, look at the adjectives: disorder, degeneracy, demonic reputation. So these are very convenient attributes which are invested in the process of producing the other, right? So the other is degenerate by default, the other is demonic by default, the other is disordered by default. Likewise, the stereotype, which is its major discursive strategy, the stereotype as a strategy is very, very important, is a form of knowledge and identification that vacillates between what is always in place, already known, and something that must be anxiously repeated, as if the essential duplicity of the Asiatic or the bestial sexual license of the African that needs no proof can never really in discourse be proved. It is this process of ambivalence central to the stereotype that my essay explores and as it constructs a theory of colonial discourse. So, what is this ambivalence that Bhabha talks about? It might sound a bit complicated, but actually it's a very simple, elegant theory. And the theory is when we create the other, when we create the excessive, demonic, degenerate, disordered other, we assume two things. A, that is, the other is disordered by default, the other is degenerate by default, and secondly, the degeneracy, the disordered quality, the demonic quality of the other must be endlessly and anxiously repeated. So this is ambivalence. So on one hand, you're saying it's fixatum. On one hand, you're saying this is a stereotype, this is something which is permanently a condition of the other. On the other hand, you're anxiously repeating it over and over again. So the point is, you're repeating as if the sexual license of the African, the bestiality of the African, the duplicity of the Asiatic, the very, very racist, offensive categories of classification. These things must be repeated in popular discourse over and over again, because the ambivalence is, these things need no proof, but it can never really be proved. So hence the repeatability, hence the need to repeat these things over and over again. And therein lies the ambivalence.